Warning: the following footage may be considered offensive to some. Viewer discretion is advised. When naming a new car, you've got two options. Either you choose a good, agreeable name, or you don't. Ever since Jeep brought back the Cherokee name to North America in 2013, discussions have surrounded the vehicle concerning the use of the indigenous Cherokee tribe's name for the car. While yes, we can have a debate on whether it's appropriate to name a car model after an ethnic group or indigenous people, the simple fact remains the same. The people in question generally don't want cars to be named after them. In 2021, Principal Chief Chuck Hoskin Jr. said in an interview,
"I'm sure this comes from a place that's well intended, but it does not honor us by having our name plastered on the side of a car."
And it's completely understandable why they might feel this way. Their identity has been turned into a marketing tool by Jeep. And remember, without consent. They don't have to receive approval to use the Cherokee name on a product, neither do they have to pay royalties or anything as such. But on the bright side, Jeep did name the original SJ Cherokee in honor of their strength and civility, and no they didn't. The name was chosen by the then head of AMC, Robert Beverly Evans, in honor of his dearly beloved Cherokee Plantation in South Carolina that he owned at the time. That's right, the Jeep Cherokee and Grand Cherokee aren't even directly named after the tribe, but instead got the name from a plantation in the South. It's truly amazing how this situation suddenly got worse. If that wasn't enough, Jeep doubled down in the 80s with the Comanche pickup truck named after another Native American tribe, the Comanche Nation. The performance trim of this pickup featured, in isolation at least, a rather cool name, the Eliminator. But that does mean that in the late 80s, Jeep was selling a truck called the Comanche Eliminator. In any other context, that would be a hate crime. It might sound like I'm only focusing on Jeep here, so I'll stop that. American manufacturers overall have a long and proud history of names and imagery inspired by Native Americans, with the most notable example being the entire Pontiac brand. Itself named after Chief Pontiac and offering models that echoed this theme. The Star Chief, the Chieftain, the Super Chief, each with names rooted in Native American imagery. Brochures and advertisements played up the connection, but the most prominent piece of indigenous inspiration was undoubtedly found on the hood. For decades, Pontiacs featured a sculpted art piece in the form of a hood ornament on the front ends of the cars. They were usually variations of a chief's head wearing a feathered headdress, starting out as a simple radiator cap in the 30s and ending with a design featuring a stylized head mounted on the front of a jet plane in the 50s. Over time, these elements were phased out, and automakers generally began to stray away from looking at indigenous tribes without consent, with notable outliers being the aforementioned Jeeps and Mazda. Not an American company, mind you. Mazda continues to be, last I checked, not American. What is American is the Ford Explorer Sport, which Mazda sneakily rebadged into the Mazda Navajo, named after the indigenous Navajo people. Now yes, it's easy to look back at such a car now, 35 years later, and say that this kind of appropriation on Mazda's part wasn't right. In hindsight, it was a bad call, and not something they could really get away with today. First of all, they would have to call it CX Navajo. And second of all, times have simply changed. Native American-inspired naming with no prior approval being given isn't seen as appropriate anymore. Well, that's a bit of a deceptive way to put it, because it was never appropriate. And don't take that from me, Mazda knew it when launching the car back in 1990. At the launch event, Mazda's spokesman diffused criticism by saying that the name was chosen for being uniquely American. And the company itself proceeded to donate 1,000 Mazda Navajos to the tribe as a gesture of goodwill. Oh, wait, no, I'm deeply sorry, I misread that. Let me do that again. The company itself proceeded to donate 1 Mazda Navajo to the tribe as a gesture of goodwill. 1 car. That's somehow more offensive than no car at all. Regardless, the Navajo tribe must be thrilled that their heritage, their legacy, has been forever attached to a product that was such a failure that it barely lasted 3 years on the market and is now considered hardly even a footnote in the company's history. I'm gonna continue with the theme of SUVs, as in recent times, all of them seem to be named after different ethnic groups. The Nissan Qashqai, the Renault Arach, or the Volkswagen Taos. In fact, Volkswagen seems to have the most misfortune when it comes to naming their crossovers. The Touareg, a strong name, got its name from the Tuareg people who, throughout 2012, were involved in a bloody insurgency. Then you've got the Taigo. Simply drop the O and you end up with a Taig, a derogatory term used against Irish Catholics in Northern Ireland. We will now quickly move on. As I've mentioned, time isn't stationary. It moves along, and over time, standards and what is seen as acceptable or not change. Sure, scat does refer to jazz music, or it could just be an exclamation, but in more modern times, it has also taken up another meaning. I'm not gonna say which meaning, I'm just gonna say that you probably wouldn't sell a car with the name Scat today. That would be a crappy choice. Isn't that right, Dodge? Hey, speaking of Dodge, another one of their trim names they probably should have dodged originated in the 60s and ran through the 70s on the Dodge Dart. The Dart Swinger. The Swinger name was generally just used to denote the two-door variant of the car, but that's not the reason we're discussing this right now. Swinger refers to someone who participates in swinging, a choice of lifestyle that traces its modern-day roots to the sexual revolution of the 1960s. When Dodge debuted the Dart Swinger, the word had very much gained its modern-day meaning by that point, and honestly, that leads me to perhaps believe that Dodge knew well what this word referred to, and chose this specific name intentionally. I mean, they are a bit rebellious after all. It's a part of the brand's image, and the same could obviously be said about Subaru of Singapore. At the 2020 Singapore Motor Show, they showed off a show car, the Subaru Forester Ultimate Customized Kit Special Edition. An act so heinous that Subaru of America immediately notified its dealers and the press that they had nothing to do with it. Thank God, I was almost worried there for a moment. Starting around 1927, Studebaker introduced a new lineup of vehicles, all approximately named after positions in government, like the Studebaker Chancellor, President, Commander, and, as you'd expect, Dictator. Mind you, this was pre-World War II. The world hadn't quite realized what an authoritarian government is. This obviously began to change during the 30s, especially as a certain fat man and a drug addict began to gather power in Europe. Perhaps it was partially thanks to this that the Studebaker Dictator was discontinued in 1937, although a wrench is thrown into the argument that the name became toxic over time when you realize that the Dictator was, from the beginning, sold as the Director in Europe. The company obviously realized it would have been a controversial idea to retain its original name overseas, so the question has to be asked why they stuck with the nameplate in the first place. Now, if you're wondering whether any actual dictators ever had a Studebaker Dictator in their possession, the answer would appear to be yes. Here's one belonging to Hitler's fleet. And while Estonian President Konstantin Päts apparently drove around in one, no real proof of that has survived. On that note, it's hard to think of a car that could possibly beat the Studebaker in terms of wearing a poor, bad, laughable, terribly aged rubbish name. The Chevrolet Confederate, a name applied specifically to the 1932 Series BA lineup, which encompassed 14 different body styles that year. 14, eh? The Chevy was on sale less than 70 years after the end of the Civil War. There were veterans still alive during that time. You know, veterans from both sides, the Union and the Confederacy. But hey, maybe I'm delusional. Perhaps the name wasn't intended to pay homage to the Confederates of the Confederacy. I do hope that's the case, because the very next year one of Chevrolet's updated models bore the name Chevrolet Mazda. Master of whom? Thankfully, we live in modern times, and nowadays American automakers would never name a car in honor of the wrong, losing side of their own Civil War. Corsa members, you keep on joining and I keep on thanking you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much Casada BG, Adrian Z, Asterin X, Riser Drifter, Fraudy B, Daniel, Oskan B, Aditya G, Chad A, William, Konstantin, Igor Y, Yoroshika, Steven C, Elana Z, Sherman Firefly, Pure Charm, Daniel H, Lava Great the Great, Billy Crook, Chris, Joaquin C, Marcus G, Juan Camilo G, Patrick L, Brad, Jake, Kawauchi, Ayoy, Swing Power, Dylan C, Max N, Shadowless, Rockefeller, Thiago Sintra, Noah Boss, Chris D, Andy Ray H, and Shizumiru.